Oh, Melissa Roberts, thank you for speaking with Central Coast newspapers, and how wonderful it is. In a few weeks, you'll be coming up to the Words on the Waves literary events at Wagstaffe, and with your new book, or your new co-edited book, Through Her Eyes. Please tell us briefly what's special, and why do you think it's been chosen in this context?
Well, Words on the Waves, it's very exciting. They're looking at the way that the world is covered in foreign news. And we believe, my co-editor Trevor Watson and I both believe really strongly that women correspondents changed the way that foreign news is covered. We were inspired to do the book because in the early days of journalism, but up to really quite recently, up to even the mid-1980s, it was very hard for women to get a formal posting to a foreign bureau. If they wanted to go and cover the news, had to pay their own way and freelance once they get there, which was how I started out. But now you see women everywhere, you know, lacing up their combat boots, wearing flak jackets, interviewing heads of government, embedding with US Special Forces. They're doing all of these really exciting things. And we wanted to look at some of these fabulous stories that they have to tell, which are really exciting and adventurous, and also have a look at how they've made a big impact on news and how it's covered.
So, prior to this interview, we had a quick discussion, and it hasn't left my head. You started digging in the archives going back to World War II, and a woman who covered her own way during the Pacific campaign, and even was awarded a medal from MacArthur, General MacArthur himself. Just briefly, set us off there.
Lorraine Stum, well, she's a bit of a hero of mine. She was a terrific journalist. She covered Singapore during the war. And then she worked in MacArthur's headquarters here in Brisbane in Australia, and got the opportunity to travel with, or to have MacArthur sent her to Papua New Guinea, where she covered the war alongside some of our most famous foreign correspondents like George Johnson. And he actually gave her a star of commendation, one of only 2 women to ever receive that, for her coverage of the Pacific War. And she had the opportunity to go and cover the end of the war in Japan. And her editor said, sure, go, but take a holiday and pay your own way, make your own way there, which was pretty difficult while the world was in flames, you know. But anyway, she did it. And she got there and became one of the first correspondents. She became the first Western correspondent to interview a Western survivor of the Hiroshima bombing.
Good Lord, it's very significant history, and it seems to have been, lost in the archives. So wonderful that you bring it up. And then if we go to the other end of the spectrum, you also you go all the way to present day, to the Ukraine and the conflict, the war in Ukraine.
Yes, we've got lots of women covering the Ukraine, and one of them was that wrote a chapter for the book was Barbara Miller, who covered the refugees flooding out of Ukraine under the first bombing attacks by the Russians, which, it's interesting in this period, in this century, we've had a lot of refugees trying to cross Europe, escaping war, trying to find some kind of safety. And she was just struck by the way that the stories of these people in the Ukraine were so similar to the stories that she'd covered of people trying to make it to Greece and into Europe.
It's, yes, well, fortunately, Australia hasn't experienced that yet, other than, of course, bringing all those wonderful refugees to the country. Now, this is the Words on the Waves of Wagstaffe, or Words at Wagstaffe, is kicking off in a few weeks' time. I understand it's the 18th of March. And have you been to Wagstaffe before and met the community?
Well, not yet, and I'm really, really looking forward to getting to Wagstaffe. When I was a schoolgirl, I spent quite a lot of holidays at Kilcare, which is a gorgeous spot. And so I'm very keen to get back there and see what it's like these days and be there as a grown-up.
Oh, that's wonderful. And you're being interviewed, I understand, by Kylie Morris, who is also a contributor to the book.
Yeah, Kylie was based in the United States for Channel 4, and she writes very, very movingly about so many of the stories that she covered. And of course, those tragic school shootings seem to happen so often on her patch, which was very shattering. She also covered the tsunami that in Indonesia that took so many lives. And I think that was a very, very traumatic thing for her to cover and live through. And so we talk a bit about, you know, the moral injury, I guess, that happens when a correspondent goes to these places and deals with so many people in such extreme, devastating conditions, when all around you is sort of death or disaster or sadness. And it's really strange, because then at the end of the day, a car or a helicopter comes for you, and you head away and leave all of these people to their lives. It's an extraordinary and sometimes very difficult way of living.
Yeah, we interviewed Andrew Quilty on his return from Afghanistan as embedded, and I think it's fair to say he said he was morally injured by the experience in Afghanistan.
It is very challenging. It is very hard to then just sort of turn your back on these people. Sophie McNeill talks about a boatload of refugees coming ashore when she was working for the ABC in Greece. And there was one really elderly man who was just sitting on the beach weeping. And she wanted to find out what his problem was, particularly. So she went up to him and started talking to him, and he'd lost his family somehow. They'd been separated on the boats. And he was elderly. He couldn't walk very far. And he had no one to help him. And she knew that if she left him there, he would die. So she just downed tools and decided, well, this is my moment. You know, what kind of person am I? And she decided that she would help this man, and she put him in. She knew he couldn't walk there, and it was against the law to transport refugees. She said, well, we're just going to have to do it. So she took him and she got him to the Red Cross, and it was quite a challenging story for her. But she managed to do her work and get it done. But she made sure that this man was finally reunited with his family, and she saw him once again when he got safely to Germany, and he was with his wife and children, and so happy. So that was that's just a beautiful, moving story that she tells in our book.
Well, do you think that a female perspective on war adds another dimension? I mean, that story very obviously does, not to say that it's just a female story, but do you think that your female contributors, the ones you've edited, add a depth to the war story that isn't usually told?
Yeah, you know, I think that women change the way news is reported. I think that now it's different to the way it was before we had lots of female foreign correspondents. I mean, initially, up until the sort of the 80s, really women were confined to doing very soft stories. We weren't allowed to go to the front because, you know, we'd distract the soldiers. It was too dangerous for ladies. There were no ladies' toilets. There were all these reasons given why we couldn't go and do those hard news stories. And so women had to stay behind the lines and cover the injured and the refugees and the nurses. And it was interesting. They were soft stories, and what we used to call soft stories, compared to the hard stories that the men were covering, the so-called hard stories of the battles and the great men of history. But I think what happened was something really strange happened when women were finally allowed to cover what they wanted to cover, is they kept doing these stories about real people. And those stories resonated with the people back home. People were fascinated about the lives of actual people being caught up in the winds of war. And so the old-fashioned World War II style of talking about the great men of history and the movement of battalions really morphed into something different. And now men and women are all covering the stories of the people sheltering in the basements in Kiev, rather than the name of the general who ordered the bombing or the number on the ordnance that's raining down on them. So I think it has changed, and I think men and women report very differently these days.
Well, that's a wonderful way to wrap up. I look forward to seeing you there, and invite listeners and viewers to come along. I think there are some tickets left still. It's quite a big hall, but I dare say they'll probably have to open the doors and put people on the veranda as well.
Well, that would be wonderful. I hope everybody comes along. It's going to be great to meet lots of people there.
Thanks for speaking with Central Coast Newspapers.
Oh, thank you so much, David.